Now we are at the right place when we have to, start working with differentiation among various different terminologies which are there. And apart from that, we need to also have common understanding about certain terminologies which are frequently used in system architectures. And if you see, these are the frequent terms that comes: front end, middleware, back end, third party systems. Now, if you see, most of the software system architectures actually are divided into components because it's all about how decoupled our architecture is, right? And that's the reason why we, divide or we split components which are user facing, called as front end systems, data storage and processing. You can say when they need to be enriched with certain additional capabilities, middleware comes into picture. So your architectures, your applications can include middleware systems like WebSphere MQ or Kafka, TIBCO, right? There are various different middleware systems and external services which enriches your application depending on your need. So you can actually utilize service virtualization specifically to virtualize or simulate middleware, backend, and third-party systems, right? So when we talk about virtualization, these three are the right candidate from your software architecture. Then comes API. API is acronym of Application Programming Interface. An objective of API is to help understand how front end, middleware, your backend systems, your third party systems are going to communicate with each other. Now, for example, your front end system can communicate using API with middleware and backend system, while your backend system can communicate to third party systems using API. And what we can do, we can use service virtualization to even simulate APIs. And finally, understanding of HTTP request and response, because this is what is one of the de facto protocol for communication. You'll find that these days HTTP or HTTPS is considered as one of the most prominent protocol that can be used to send requests to backend system API, which in turn will return HTTP response. Now what we can do, I have my service which I have virtualized. I have to simulate HTTP request and response. How do we simulate? We simulate using service virtualization. So what all are the right candidates of service virtualization? It is middleware, backend, third-party system, APIs, as well as we can simulate HTTP request and response with service virtualization. So you need to now think of your architecture, which you are planning to simulate, and then accordingly plan your strategy of using service virtualization. So in my last training, when I was having, people were actually confused on stubbing, mocking, and service virtualization, right? So I thought that I will first ensure that we are understanding objective of these three, because you'll find that stubbing, mocking, or service virtualization are three names that refers the same practice of simulation of backend or third party systems with the objective of definitely, improving development testing of applications. Now, how do we do this? Now we can use stubbing, mocking, or service virtualization tools that helps us to create simulation of a backend or third party API. And this simulation will help us to test applications in hypothetical or test applications which are hard to test, or situations when actually you are blocked. Not only that, it also allows you to run more test scenarios early in order to detect issues early. Now, what are these simulators called? These simulators are called as stubs for stubbing, mock for mocking, virtual service for service virtualization. So this is what are three different terms which we need to be aware of. Now, talking about what is the fundamental difference between stubbing, mocking, and service virtualization. For that, we need to understand test doubles. So if you see, stubbing, mocking, and service virtualization are from family of test doubles. And what is a test double? Test double is a simulator which actually can be used in software development and testing, primarily to simulate a system instead of using actual system. Who are the candidates who will be using? Developers and testers. Both of them will be using. So you'll be using API simulation, you'll be using API mock, you'll be using virtual service in order to work with it. So this is what our comparative approaches that we use in order to work with service virtualization. Okay. So before we move to other parts of service virtualization, we need to understand test doubles. What is a test double? See, primary objective of test double is to help us in decoupling our environment with dependencies, specifically when the system under test is need to be tested. So what you do, you actually replace that dependency with an interface, and that interface allows you to execute a test case. So there are multiple different types of test doubles that are used by developers as well as by QAs. So if you see, test doubles allows us to decouple. We replace the dependency with an equivalent interface. Categories of test doubles that are used by developers. These are different categories. Dummy object, stub. For example, you can create a stub for your HTTP response, and that stub returns you the response, say 200, which is okay. Spy. Spy is used in order to record all the invocations. Then fake, which actually fakes an expensive system. And you have mock. A mock is nothing but it's a proxy implementation of your component through its interface. So these are different test doubles which are used by developers. Now, what about QA? You will be using stub and you will be using virtual service. And these virtual services are created using service virtualization tool. After creating service, they are deployed to a remote shared virtual service environment. So these are different test doubles. What I need to know, if I am a developer and if I have adopted a framework called Mockito, I need to know how do I work with dummy object, how do I work with stub, how do I work with spy, how do I work with fake, how do I work with mock. And if I am a QA, I need to know how do I utilize stubbing and how do I create a mock server and a virtual service. Which framework or tool I need to select in order to do that. So this becomes our objectives. So depending on need, you have to go and you have to decide which type of test double you are planning to use. Now let's limit our understanding to three important ones which you will be using. First is a stub. Now what is stub? It is minimum possible implementation of an interface that is sufficient enough to help you in using it in your test suite. What we do in stub, most of the time you'll find that, it returns hard-coded data whenever a call is made. And this hard-coded data is tightly coupled to your test environment. In short, when you're going with stub, your tests are going to depend on data. Now you should ask me that it's a tedious task, but don't worry. There are some frameworks, some tools that helps you to generate these stubs. Okay, I'm aware about stub now. It's minimal implementation of an interface. What about mock? See, objective of mock is to ensure that your output is verified against expectation. And those expectations are set in your test. In order to create mocks, you can use frameworks like Mockito, JMock. There are plenty of them. I will show you the list. We can say that mock is one of the most useful implementations, specifically, when you have large suite of tests, you'll find that stubs are not enough because each of the tests need different data set. So maintaining a particular stub becomes very difficult as well as costly. Not only that, verification of mock is again an important aspect. And that verification process, that how many times this was invoked kind of verification, right, is what is something which makes mock better as compared to stub. So mock is not only stub, which is data set, but on top of that, mock also looks into interaction rather than only capturing the state. So you should ask me, okay, so you are saying that stubs are stateless and mocks are stateful. Yes, mocks are stateful. And that's the reason you can verify how many times a given call method was called, how many times a given method was called. It is only possible if it retains the state of the previous calls. And that's what is the feature that you get in mock. Now you'll say that I'm still confused. So main difference between mock and stub is in mock, you can go through verification process, not in stub. Fine. Now you are telling me that, okay, stub and mock is sufficient enough in order to specify my dependency. Then why do I need to use virtual service? It's a good question. See, virtual service is again a test double, but it is provided to you by a comprehensive tool. Most of the tools are software as a service. And what you can do is by using this software as a service, you can record rather than building mocking artifacts from scratch. So if you're looking for a service virtualization platform, please look at it, whether recording is possible or record and play is possible or not. Not only that, it's a zero code, no code platform for you to build your test dependencies quickly. Whereas stubs and mocks need to be written by developers. Service virtualization is facilitated by various tools and they are capable of identifying protocols without you doing anything, specifically protocols like HTTP, MQ, TCP, and others. But when you select stub and mock, you have to write mock for every single protocol. And that's what is the pain. So depending on your need, you have to go and you have to decide whether you will be using stub, you'll be using mock, or you'll be using virtual service. Am I clear? If you are QA, you would not like to write much of code. In that scenario, virtual service is much better for you. But if you are a developer and you are following TDD, test-driven development, probably mocks and stubs can be very handy to you. Mocks are stateful, stubs are not. When your test increases, a stub can be painful, whereas mock provides you capability of generating using frameworks. So there are multiple tools which can be used by you. So test doubles are clear. What we are going to do, we are going to deal with test doubles. So now time has come to close on, by doing a brief comparison. And this is something which will help you to decide, is service virtualization better than stubbing and mocking in your scenario? See, stubs, mocks, a virtual service. Comparison on basis of certain common attributes like data source, coupling, invocation verification, invocation protocol support, created by who is engaged in this, used by, whether it is stateful or not, has a GUI or not, and which is the test phase when it is used. So you need to have your testing strategy in place, right? And you need to guide your developers if you are team lead that, see, for this, you have to go and use stubbing, for this mock, and for this virtual service. Stubs are usually hard-coded data or data set up by the test. Data coupling tightly coupled. Invocation verification not used because it is stateless. Invocation protocol usually in the same process, right? Like JVM, .NET, depends what you are using. Sometimes over IP such as HTTP or raw TCP protocol created by devs because development is required, used by devs and sometimes QA. Stateful no, has GUI no. In which test phase? Unit, integration, system, and acceptance test. Mock, data set up by test. It's not hard coded. Data set up by the test. Can be flexible, both tightly and loosely coupled, depends. Used often. Usually in the same process, it's the same. Mostly devs because coding is required. Used by devs and sometimes QA. Stateful, yes. Has a GUI, sometimes command line. Test, usually unit, integration, system, and acceptance. And finally, virtual service. Recorded data, possibly manually modified after the recording or hard-coded, tightly coupled to the test. Sometimes testers will look at the virtual service logs for verification, and always over a network, supports multiple different protocols used by QA, mostly, not by developers. Stateful, yes. Has GUI, yes. Usually system tests because it is communication among various different channels that you have built for various different components as part of your architecture. So what you need to do, I'm not saying that only use virtual service. You have to see the testing structure, you have to see the scope, and then you have to suggest which type of tests need to be done. Now, is service virtualization better? For this, you need to know when to use it, when not to use it, and main pros and cons. So if you see, main pros of stubbing is a lot of open source software available, a lot of information available on the technique online. Tests are tightly coupled to the stub because of the hard-coded data. Agreed. When to use it? When the test suite requires a lot of stub, then the data should live with the test. Use mocks instead. When not to use? If you are willing to learn how to use stubs, it's a good idea. A moderate level of technical background is required. Avoid using stub with hard-coded data in acceptance tests. So avoid in acceptance tests. Mocking, lot of open source available. Tool for developer mainly. All level of testings can be done. If you are willing to learn how to use mocking, it is always good idea. A substantial level of technical background is required. So for this, you need to know the language and the framework, which itself has lots of learning curve. It has some learning curve involved in that. Now, what is service virtualization? Main pros, steep learning curve, easy to pick up. So you will see when we talk about wire mock, or when we talk about, a ready API, when we talk about Parrot, there are multiple different frameworks. So some of the frameworks we will go through, and some of the frameworks, we can take target as your next step when you're working. And specifically, it depends what actually you are going to use. Can record traffic, easy to share across the teams once the tools are established with the company. Expensive, this is con, but useful. So I'll not go on expense, it depends on the company. Large scale problems, a lot of API to stub out, and a lot of people that want to use it starting today. And finally, when not to use it, for small teams in small to medium size companies where developer work in an agile manner and knows how to create stubs and mocks, in those cases, you can avoid service virtualization. So this is how you will decide which one is better for you. Now, we need to be pro service virtualization. So we need to understand what pain points are there which are addressed by service virtualization. And do we fall under same category? Too much pressure on testing team and not enough time to test. Testers being blocked by other teams, not delivering API on time. Hard to reproduce production bugs resulting in frustration and time loss. So you can virtualize it. Creating test data is complex and takes time, which slows down the overall testing. Scheduling time on test environments resulting in inefficient use of testers' time. Cost of third-party test transactions can be complicated or can complicate testing efforts, and unreliable performance tests. So these are some of the pain points that can help you to understand that you are in right phase of actually deciding to go ahead with service virtualization. Because you see, service virtualization is all about creating virtual service and sharing them across teams. Now your developers as well as testers working on the same product can use the same virtual service artifact or even virtual service. So that gives you the benefit of sharing your virtualized services with the entire team, which definitely drops down the time that is required. Fine. So if I say what classifies me to adopt service virtualization, it is pretty simple. Assume that I'm a developer working on a very large legacy application that has multiple dependencies. And when I took out test coverage report, it was less than 3% or 5%. Not only that, I found that most of the dependencies of the systems are unavailable almost 50% of the time. This is the candidate where you can use service virtualization. You can use a tool to create virtual service and you can record the traffic. Now, this actually helps the developer to eliminate need of dependencies and also his dependency on downtime. Now, I am a front-end developer and I'm working with publicly published API. What I would do? I would use Sandbox, and that sandbox of that publicly available service will be used to generate the virtual service. If you are using SOAP, you can use WSDL file to do that. So it depends, that what is your need and whether you can do with stubbing mocking, or you have to go ahead with service virtualization. But these are the pain points which reflects that you are in need of some service virtualization tool. Fine. So my story is going to get over because now we are moving to, something which is about tools, and we will be adopting certain tools from here to work with it. If you see, there is huge list of tools. These all are tools which are used for service virtualization. All these are tools. Some of them you might have heard, like Ready API, Test Complete, even Postman can be used, right? Sandbox, Mockable, Mock Server, API Mock, all these are tools which can be used. Rest Assured, all these are tools. Now, level of simplicity, it depends on the tool, and most of the tools which provides you automation will cost you more. So keeping that in mind, you have to do cost benefit analysis and then select the right tool. Now assume that I'm giving you responsibility of selecting the right tool. So when you go ahead and select the right tool, you need to ask certain questions to yourself. Also have a brainstorming session in your team. Now, what are those questions that you have to ask? Pretty simple. Which protocols or technologies do you use? This is the first one. Are you only okay with HTTPS, or you need AMQP, JMS, native IBM MQ, right? So you need to capture what is overall dependency and why do you need a particular service virtualization tool, and what kind of services you are going to mock so that your test is dependency is taken care. Second question, which type of software do you currently use? Only open source, mostly open source and some commercial, mostly commercial and some open source, only commercial, right? Because connectors are required, and you need to also see what is your environment. If it is open source, probably you will have full code open, right? So there you can do some tasks along with mocking also. Do you need a graphical user interface? Working with command line and programmable interface is enough, or you need a graphical user interface, or you need both? So it depends. If you're going with programmable interface and API, learning curve is more. If you just use graphical user interface, it is less flexible, because when you use your APIs and programming interface, you have less control when you are only using graphical user interface, because you'll be able to do what actually it provides. Then next question is, are you developing a microservice or a monolith? All these critical questions will help you in deciding the right tool for you. Only working in a monolith, mostly monolith, but few microservices, mostly microservices, or only microservices. So these are some of the important questions that helps you to understand. Then you have to see, okay, what performance characteristics do you need? It's not important because you are not doing performance testing. Basically, you are seeing intercommunication among services. Less than 20 requests per second or whatever. So depending on your need, you can select from here. Do you need ready-made mocks for third-party APIs, or you are planning to write on your own? It's up to you. Now, after you will do that, selecting what is the team size, and after you answer all these questions, you get suggestions, right? So possible candidates or output would be this. So I'll keep this slide for 2 minutes so that you can see, and then we'll move forward. I'll be on mute. You have to just have a look over this, see yes, 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 and decide which one is the best one. Okay, so if you see, you have Charles Proxy, Hoverfly, Mountbank, SOAP UI mock server. You can also, I haven't included all because the list is really huge. Traffic Parrot, WireMock, you can have Ready API. So there are multiple different options are there. So when you are going for selection, keep these questions in mind, which just now we discussed, right? Open source, free, HTTPS, JMS support is there or not, MQ, file transfer, gRPC. You can add more depending on your need. So this is how you will be selecting the right virtualization tool. So objective of this part of session was to give you fair understanding about service virtualization, difference between stubbing, mocking, and service virtualization, also some pain points which service virtualization takes care, and how do we select the right or the most fit service virtualization tool.